All right, so get this. We're going deep into the Delhi Sultanate today. But this time, we're not just doing the usual, like the battles and the rulers.
Right.
We're looking at how this empire wasn't just like powerful, but a global economic force. Almost like the Silk Road, but with an Indian twist.
Yeah, yeah.
Bustling trade routes, complicated taxes, and all this vibrant culture, all connecting India to the world. Pretty wild.
Yeah, it really is. This era, from the 13th to the 16th century CE, it shows us a subcontinent that was just buzzing with activity.
Like nonstop.
And the Sultanate, their control, it stretched across a massive part of India. I mean, they had access to so many resources and trade routes. It's incredible.
So we're talking like dynasties, the slave dynasty, the Khalajis, the Tughlaqs, right?
Exactly.
And these weren't just names in a book.
No.
They were shaping global commerce.
They were major players.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So what were some of the big trade routes, the ones that really crisscrossed the Sultanate?
Oh, tons.
I'm picturing like these huge caravans packed with like exotic goods.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. The Sultanate was involved in both land and sea routes, like take the Northwestern passages, for example.
Okay.
These routes, they went through like these really intense mountain passes, like the Khyber Pass,
Wow.
linking India to Central Asia, Persia, even further west. Merchants would like literally brave treacherous terrain just to get these goods transported, silk, spices, precious metals, the whole work.
Oh, yeah. It's like a real life adventure unfolding right there.
It was.
So what about connections to that famous Silk Road? You know the one.
Oh.
Did the Delhi Sultanate, were they part of that network?
Oh, absolutely. They were key players on the Silk Road, facilitating this flow of goods from east to west. So imagine Chinese porcelain making its way to Europe, or Indian spices, like adding flavor to dishes across continents.
Right.
And it wasn't just about the goods either. It
Right.
was ideas, technologies, cultures all being exchanged.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got goods coming and going, this mix of cultures, but let's be real for a second. What about the less glamorous side of empire? Taxes.
Oh, yeah, taxes.
I have a feeling the Sultanate system wasn't just about collecting a handful of coins, right?
Oh, definitely not. They had a very well-developed, sophisticated system. It funded everything they did. Land revenue was like the backbone, and each dynasty, they had their own way of doing it, which obviously impacted the people. Some rulers, they'd put these heavy taxes on what farmers were producing,
Right.
while others, they gave exemptions to try and encourage people to cultivate more land.
Interesting.
And then you had trade duties.
Okay.
Also a huge source of income. So merchants paid taxes on all the goods they were transporting, and that money, it funded the Sultanate's infrastructure projects, the roads, the bridges.
So those impressive mosques, palaces, all that stuff we connect with that era, that was all built thanks to taxes.
In a way, yeah.
That's a wild way to look at history. Okay, so beyond land and trade, were there any other like notable taxes they imposed?
Oh, well, one that definitely stands out, and it still causes a lot of debate today, is the jizya.
Okay.
And this was a tax that was put on non-Muslim subjects in the Sultanate.
Interesting.
Now, how it was implemented, it really varied from ruler to ruler. Some, they used it as a way to show their authority,
Yeah.
but others, they saw it as a way to fund social welfare programs.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like this jizya had a pretty big impact on how different religious groups interacted within the Sultanate.
It definitely did.
It's a topic that deserves more exploration for sure. But before we get too deep into that, I'm curious about the people themselves. We've talked about routes and taxes and all that, but did all this economic activity create a diverse culture within the Sultanate?
Oh, absolutely. The Delhi Sultanate, it was like a melting pot of cultures. Think about it. You have merchants, scholars, artisans coming from all over Asia, even beyond. And they bring their languages, their customs, their beliefs, all with them.
I can only imagine what a mix that must have been. Like, what were some of the biggest cultural influences that, shaped the Sultanate? Was there one group that left a lasting mark?
Well, one of the most significant influences came from Persia. You had Persian scholars, poets, administrators. They were in high demand in the Sultanate's courts.
I bet.
Yeah, and so Persian, it became the language of administration, diplomacy, high culture. It even influenced how the Urdu language developed.
Oh, wow.
But of course, this exchange, it wasn't just about language.
Right. I was just thinking, like, Persian art, architecture, that must have made its way into the Sultanate too, right? It's pretty cool to imagine how those styles mixed and, changed over time.
Exactly. And you can see that Persian influence in the mosques and palaces from that time, like the Qawa-ul-Islam Mosque in Delhi.
Okay, yeah.
It's one of the earliest examples of Indo-Islamic architecture still standing. It shows this blend of Islamic architectural ideas with Indian craftsmanship. You see things like intricate floral designs, calligraphic inscriptions. Those are like classic Persian artistic elements, right, in the design.
So it's like you can see that cultural fusion right there in the building itself.
Yeah.
Amazing. Did that mixing, like, did it extend to religious practices too? I mean, with so many different faiths present, there had to be some sharing, or at least like coexisting.
It was definitely a complex situation. So Islam was the dominant faith of the rulers, but the Sultanate was also home to tons of Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and others.
Wow.
There were times of conflict, for sure, but for the most part, these different communities, they lived together, and you can see evidence of them sharing culture and philosophy. Sufi mystics, for example, they're known for their tolerance, their focus on spiritual unity, and they became really popular during this time, and they really contributed to this, like, more blended religious atmosphere, at least in certain areas.
So it wasn't just goods moving around. It was ideas, beliefs, all being shared and transformed.
Right.
Makes you wonder, was all this exchange like part of the Sultanate's policies? Or did it just happen naturally through trade and all the interactions?
Probably a bit of both, honestly. The Sultanate's policies, especially on trade, I mean, that definitely made interaction and exchange easier.
Yeah.
But cultural stuff, it happens on a more personal level too, you know, through the daily lives of merchants, travelers, communities.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got these trade routes linking the Sultanate to the rest of the world, this intricate tax system, and this incredible cultural mix happening.
Yeah.
But running an empire that big, it must have taken some serious diplomatic skills, right?
Oh, absolutely. To keep things stable and prosperous, they had to navigate this really complex web of relationships with all the kingdoms and empires around them.
Right.
They couldn't just rely on their military. They had to be smart diplomats, making alliances, negotiating treaties, sometimes even using strategic marriages to, like, cement their position.
So who were the main players in this whole diplomatic game? Did the Sultanate have any, like, rivals that always popped up or long-term allies?
Well, the Mongol Empire, they were a huge force to the northwest, and they were a major factor in the Sultanate's diplomatic strategies.
Okay.
Sometimes there was conflict. The Mongol armies would launch attacks into the Sultanate's territory, but there were also times of diplomacy and exchange.
Interesting.
And then the Sultanate also had to manage its relationships with all the different Hindu kingdoms within India.
Right.
Sometimes they'd make alliances, other times they'd go to war, all to expand their influence.
Sounds like a constant juggling act, trying to keep peace and security while also looking out for the Sultanate's own interests. Do we have any examples of, like, diplomatic wins or, like, epic fails from this era, something that really stands out?
One that comes to mind is their relationship with the Ilkhanate. It was a Mongol Khanate that controlled Persia.
Gotcha.
At first, there was a lot of hostility, but eventually they managed to establish diplomatic relations. Embassies were sent back and forth, and there's even proof that Indian scholars and artisans traveled to the Ilkhanate court.
Wow.
So this diplomatic opening, it led to more cultural and intellectual exchange, and it helped create a period of relative stability along the Sultanate's northwestern border.
That's a really cool example of how diplomacy can, like, bridge different cultures and create opportunities for everyone to work together.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes you realize that history isn't just about, conquests and battles. It's full of these subtle interactions.
It's much more nuanced than that.
Okay, so we've talked trade routes, taxes, this cultural blend, and all the diplomatic maneuvering. But what about the sources themselves? Like, how do we know all of this stuff? It's not like we have tweets from the Delhi Sultanate.
Right. Luckily, though, we do have a bunch of historical sources that help us understand this period.
Okay.
We have chronicles written by court historians, travelogues from people visiting from other places, inscriptions on monuments and coins, even letters and documents that have been preserved in archives.
I'm picturing, like, dusty old scrolls and faded ink, revealing secrets from centuries ago.
It's pretty amazing.
So what kind of stories do these sources tell? Is it just the big stories of kings and battles? Or do we get glimpses into the lives of, like, regular people too?
Well, it's interesting because you get a mix of perspectives.
Okay.
We get accounts of these huge military campaigns and all the drama in the court, but we also find records of, like, merchant deals, legal arguments, even personal letters that show what everyday people were worried about, what they hoped for.
So it's like piecing together this huge, complicated puzzle, and each source adds another piece.
Exactly.
And as we put it all together, we start to see a more complete, more nuanced picture of what the Delhi Sultanate was really like.
That's the goal. And through that process, we start to really appreciate how complex this period was, how everything was connected, and how relevant it still is to us today.
Yeah, this has been so interesting. We started with trade routes and ended up talking about globalization and like the human experience across time.
It all ties together.
It's wild how much you can learn just by exploring one historical period.
It really is.
But before we get totally lost in the history books, I have one more question.
Yeah.
We talked about the jizya and its impact on different groups.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, how did people who had to pay it, how did they feel about it?
Yeah.
Was it just universally accepted, or did it cause, like, pushback or resentment?
That's a really good question, and it's one that historians are still debating,
Yeah.
The jizya was definitely a sensitive issue, and how people saw it really depended on the situation, the ruler's policies, and what different communities actually experienced.
Yeah.
Some sources suggest people accepted it, like it was just a condition for non-Muslims living in the Sultanate and practicing their faith.
Okay.
But other sources, they hint at resentment, even resistance. It was definitely complex.
It's pretty amazing how one tax can tell us so much about, like, power, identity, how people live together in this huge empire.
It really does.
It makes you wonder, what if we could, like, go back in time, experience the Delhi Sultanate firsthand?
Time travel.
Yeah. What would it be like to walk those trade routes or see the Sultanate's court?
Oh, man. Imagine being a trader, going through those mountain passes in the Northwest, your caravan loaded with silks and spices.
Oh, yeah.
Heading to some far-off market.
Or you could be in a bustling port city, like Cambay,
Oh, yeah.
surrounded by merchants from all over the Indian Ocean. Everyone's haggling over jewels, perfumes, all that.
I can almost smell the incense, hear all the noise.
Right. Sensory overload, but in a good way.
Totally. Or we could be right in the Sultanate's court seeing how diplomacy and power played out.
Yeah, trying to figure out all the alliances, the rivalries.
The little things that could make or break a treaty.
Exactly. Or maybe we'd be drawn to the intellectual scene, all those scholars and artists the Sultanate supported.
Oh, yeah. Think about those debates on philosophy, theology.
Yeah.
Poets reciting verses in perfect Persian. Musicians blending different traditions.
It must have been so creative, so much exchange happening.
Absolutely. The Sultanate was a hub for all of that, attracting thinkers and artists from across the Islamic world and beyond.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But, life in the Delhi Sultanate wasn't all palaces and poetry. There had to be hardship, too, especially for the people who weren't at the top.
Oh, for sure. You're right.
What about the farmers? The ones burdened by those land taxes?
Yeah.
Or the artisans trying to keep up in a changing economy?
Those are really important points. The Sultanate had its good times economically, but there were also famines, revolts, and the constant threat of invasion.
Right.
People's lives were often shaped by things they couldn't control.
Yeah.
But they were resilient, they adapted, they kept their traditions, and they contributed to the Sultanate's social fabric. It's pretty amazing.
Their stories, even though they're often overlooked, they remind us that human experience is, well, it's complicated.
It is.
It's a mix of good and bad, strength and vulnerability. And even in those grand historical stories, it's the individual lives, the hopes and dreams, that make the past meaningful.
That's so true. And by looking at those individual stories, by understanding the economy, the diplomacy, the cultural exchange that shaped the Delhi Sultanate, we get a deeper understanding not just of that time, but of how human societies are connected across time and space.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key things you want our listeners to think about? What lessons from the Delhi Sultanate can we apply to our world today?
One big lesson is that our world is interconnected. That's something we can't forget. The Sultanate's trade, their diplomacy, that cultural mix within their borders, it reminds us that globalization in different forms has been shaping us for centuries.
It's like we're seeing a historical version of our globalized world today.
Exactly. And their experiences, both good and bad, can teach us a lot about navigating our own complex, interconnected world.
That makes a lot of sense.
Another important takeaway is the power of human resilience and adaptability. Even with all those challenges, the invasions, the economic ups and downs, the people of the Delhi Sultanate found ways to thrive, adapt, and build a vibrant society. It's a powerful reminder that even when things are tough, human ingenuity, our ability to innovate, can help us overcome.
This has been an incredible journey. We started with trade routes and taxes, and we ended up talking about globalization, human resilience, and how history is still relevant today. It's amazing how one topic can lead to so many deep insights.
It really is. And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about the Delhi Sultanate, so much to discover. I encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating era, find those hidden stories, and see how it connects to the present.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of the Delhi Sultanate. Until next time, keep those historical questions coming and keep exploring the incredible stories of the past.